predict the environmental impacts, by planning, designing, and find ways to reduce the adverse impacts. And that shapes the project and the study the local environment. The predictions useful to decision making process. In the environmental impact assessment in India, a saturated body under Environmental Protection Act 1986, which contains various methodologies and different process in EIA. The core values of EIA: integrity. Integrity is quality or being honest, having moral principles. Before starting any project, the authority, project authority, should have the moral principles towards the environmental safeguard. And the next, utility. EIA process should provide balanced and credible information for decision making. The natural resources using and impacting the environment should give accurate information to the decision makers in the EIA. Next, sustainability. The sustainability is very important in environment safeguard. The key environmental safeguard is biodiversity conservation and sustainable natural resource management, pollution prevention, and different emissions controlling. All these are including in sustainability. Next, environmental assessment has many benefits due to the assessment, protection of environment by taking necessary measures to minimize the adverse effects on the environment. And next, optimize the utilization of resources. The resources may be biological resources, degradation of forests, and water resources. Optimize the utilization of the water resources. Next, save overall time cost of the project. Minimize the cost effectiveness and promotes community participation. In the EIA process, community involvement is important to clarify their doubts related to the negative impacts on environment and surrounding area, and informs decision makers. What the information we are providing to the decision makers, that should be very clear and honesty. Next, base of environmentally sound projects. The environmentally sound project management means policies to be implemented by a producer or a owner of the project or an organization to ensure the compliances with all the acceptable laws of environment. And it also addressed the issues related to the EIA, keeping all the records, tracking the management mechanism, and the documenting the producing materials within the organization. Next, evaluation in history of the EIA. In the Indian experience, the environmental impact assessment that began in over 20 years back. And it started in 1976 when the Planning Commission and the Department of Science and Technology examined the river valley projects in the environmental perspective. Till 1994, environmental clearance from central government is the decision making, legislative support in EIA. And the next, and January 1994, 27 January 1994, the Union Ministry of MOF under the Environmental Protection Act 1986 given a notification, EIA notification, making to environmental clearance mandatory for the developmental projects. To start a developmental project or moderation of any developmental activity, setting up the projects listed in this notification. Now, EIA, a formal process, more than 100 countries following the environmental impact assessment. There are 32 categories of developmental projects under the industrial sector: mining, thermal power plants, and river valley projects, infrastructure development, that may be roads, highways, ports, airports, included in infrastructure activity. And the next, industries, very small to large industries, including electroplating industries also included in EIA assessment. The Ministry of MYF, the EIA legislation notified in 2006. The notification marks the mandatory for projects such as mining, thermal power plants, river valley projects, infrastructure development, industries. The next, EIA assessment, EIA cycle and producer. The EIA process in India made following the steps: screening, scoping, baseline data collection, impact analysis, mitigation and environmental impact statement, public hearing, and environmental management plan, decision making process, and monitoring the clearance condition of the EIA cycle. EIA involves different steps. The interaction between the various steps, screening, scoping, baseline data, impact analysis, mitigation, public hearing. The first one is the screening. The project plan is screened for the scale of investment, the range of investment of the project, and location of the project, and which developmental activity is considering in this project. If the project needs statutory clearance or not, that will decide in screening stage. Next one is the scoping. The project potential impacts and zone of the impact assessment, the mitigation possibilities with the project activity, and the need of the monitoring of the project. All these are consist in scoping process. Next one is the baseline data. The collection of baseline data is the environmental status of the present study area. Next, impact analysis, impact prediction, positive and negative impacts, and irreversible impacts predicted with understanding the data, understanding the project. By understanding the project assessment, we need to collect the baseline data. Next, mitigation and environmental impact statement. The EIA should include the actions, the steps involved in the preventing, minimizing the effects, and levels of the compensation if the environmental damage occurs, loss of any environmental damage. Next one is the public hearing. Public hearing is mandatory in taking decision related to the environmental impact assessment. The EIA public hearing will provide an opportunity to the concerned the stakeholders to express their opinion. The authorities encourage the public to involve in the public hearing process. The authorities give information to the surrounding people, stakeholders in the EIA making process. The public hearing should be completed within the period of 45 days from the date of receipt from the date of the request from the project owner or applicant. That should be organized by the authorities. Next, environmental management plan. Monitoring and implementation of environmental management plan. Phases of implementation of the project. Adverse negative impacts should minimize, and promote environmentally safeguard activities and alternatives and different mitigation measures need to take in the EIA process. For every project, possible alternatives should identify and compare the environmental attributes, and that alternatives should cover the local project location and the and that also increase the technology of the project, and monitoring the clearance condition. Regular monitoring is needed for every developmental activity. This is the various steps consisting in EIA. In the screening process, determining the level of project and scale of investment and type of developments and location of the developmental project, we consider these factors in screening. There are three categories of the projects. In the project category A, they require EIA because potentially significant environmental issues for these projects leads to change in the land use, biological environment, social environment, and physical environment. The developmental activity adversely affect the environment. So this category projects require an EIA. Next, category B projects. The only difference between the projects in the category: larger power plants fall under the category A, medium-sized power plants projects under category B. These projects are not located in environmentally sensitive area. And mitigation measures for these projects are also easily prescribed. So it is not located near the environmentally sensitive zone. So it is not required an EIA. The third one is the project category C. For these projects, typically do not require any environmental assessment. These projects unlikely to have adverse environmental effects. So there is no need to give an EIA report. And scoping. Key issues and impact that should be investigated in this scoping stage. Quantifiable impacts, magnitude, frequency, quantifiable impacts, aesthetic and recreational values, and significance effects of the socio-economic aspect. All these include in scoping stage. Baseline data. The impact prediction is the way of environmental consequences. the positive and negative impacts by collecting adequate baseline data. We can know the environmental impacts. The environmental impact can never be predicted with absolute certainty. By providing the different parameters related to the environment, different contaminants, pollutants should assess in the baseline data collection. For example, air pollution, the changes in the ambient air level, the quality of air changes with the developmental project. So before starting the project, we should conduct the analysis of air pollution. What are the emissions releasing from the surrounding environment? Is there any source of the air pollutants? The air pollutant effects on the soil, vegetation, and human health. All these need to be assessed. This required the data. The only National Accreditation Board for Testing Calibration Laboratories, NABL laboratories, established to assess the environmental impacts. The monitoring sites need to selected source of the pollution need to be identified, taking the samples with the possible points and should send to the NABL laboratories for the assessment of the baseline data process. Ambient air quality assessment need to carried out. The quality of air present in the surrounding area, effect on the vegetation, human health, these aspects need to consider. Next one is the monitoring of the noise. In the air monitoring, National Air Quality Monitoring Program, NAMP, implemented by the Central Pollution Control Board. Approximately 12 pollutants for air quality, particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, carbon monoxides, arsenic, benzene, nickel, all these pollutants data needs to provide in baseline data. Next, noise. The changes in ambient level, noise generated from equipment, industrial equipments, and movement of the vehicles, traffic, that effect on the fauna, animals, and human beings. The noise monitoring should be done. during daytime 7 to 10 a.m. 10 p.m. Nighttime 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. The exercise of the monitoring noise pollution required in baseline data of noise levels and traffic volume data also needed for recording, physically counting the number of vehicles passing through the project area, provide an estimate average daily traffic and the passengers through the project surroundings. These are the ambient air quality. These are the pollutants needed for the monitoring by the 24 hours interval. Different measurement methods by using the data should analyze in the enable laboratories. These are the categories of noise levels. In industrial area, daytime 75 decibels, night times 70 decibels. Apart from these levels, that should be considered as noise pollution. The silence zone consisting is 50 decibels only. Then night time. Next, in the baseline data, water sources and water availability and sediment transportation, if the any canals available in the project area, changes of the water quality, resources that may be surface water and groundwater. The surface water includes the ponds and reservoirs. In the surface water sampling, we need to select the different locations to collect the water samples. The collected water samples sent to the enable laboratories to analyze the parameters, and that surface water quality data incorporate in the EIA report. And groundwater assessment. The groundwater samples also collect with the feasible locations, because if the bore wells or open wells are available, we can collect easily the groundwater samples. Otherwise, it may be difficult to collect the samples. Depending on the availability of the sampling locations, we need to select the locations for sampling and collect the samples, water samples, and analyze in the enable laboratories. the data required for the EIA. In the water pollution studies, biological parameters also considered. Different pathogens caused to the effect on human health by causing diarrhea, and the air pollution, carbon monoxide and particulate matters causing pneumonia, fine particulate matter, lead and cadmium arsenic leads to the cardiovascular diseases, and heavy metals in the air pollution, organic, inorganic chemicals from surrounding environment, from industrial sectors leads to cancer, and agricultural runoffs, agricultural fertilizers also change the soil quality, and the air pollutions, sulfur dioxides, nitrogen oxides, and different gases, fumes from the industries that cause the chronic respiratory diseases in humans. Next, land use. The land use and drainage pattern of the project area need to consider, and land quality indicating the effects of waste disposal. If the project area having earlier any dump site or waste disposal site, that we need to consider, and the quality of the soil should monitor to assess the soil fertility from collecting the soil sample from the different locations. Soil samples collect surrounding within the area and analyze these samples in the enable laboratories. The data should incorporate in the EIA decision making process. And biological environment, deforestation and shrinkage of animal habitat. By establishing or starting any project adversely affect the biological community, degradation of the forest and destruction of the animal habitats that leads to the loss of biodiversity. The degradation of forests, shrinkage of animal habitats impact the flora and fauna, and the contaminants mostly affect the flora and fauna. The developmental activity impact the endangered species, endemic species, and migratory animals and birds. For example, by developmental activity, contaminate the surface water body that affect on the migratory birds and animals because they depend on the surface water bodies. and impact on breeding and nesting grounds by the pollution and noise levels. Air pollution impact the biological community, particularly breeding and nesting grounds. Birds impact adversely. Next, socio-economic impact on the local community, including the demographic changes, impact on the economic status of the people, because displacement of the people by the developmental activity, impact on human health, various adverse negative impact of the environment leads to human health degradation, sometimes causes to death with these pollutants, impact of increased traffic, overpopulation and urbanization leads to the increased traffic, various parameters considered for the water quality assessment, surface and groundwater quality, and different soil pollutants monitoring, various methods. These are the various methods used for the analysis of the water samples, which will use in baseline data of environmental impact assessment. For especially groundwater samples, we monitor the water quality index by different levels. These are the qualities categorized by the index value, and assessment of alternatives. By assessmenting the environmental impacts, alternative measures need to provide, an environmental impact assessment report for every project. Possible alternatives should be identified, and that should be compared with the environmental parameters. If the location of the project not feasible, we should give alternative location for the particular project or developmental activity, and also provide the alternative technologies in the process of the activity. Alternative of no project should be also considered. If any developmental activity impacting adversely, we should avoid, and we should give alternative to controlling the establishing of the new projects. Based on the best environmental options, optimum environmental benefits, optimization of the environmental benefits, economic benefits to the community, at the large alternatives should be ranked. And different mitigation plans need to implement in environmental management plan to improve the environmental safeguard. The EIA report prepared should provide the decision makers with various information with different environmental scenarios, like with the project, how the project activity impact the environment, without the project activity impact the environment, and with the project activity and alternatives should provide in EIA process. And uncertainties should also be reflected in the EIA report that are not necessary. Next one is the public hearing. Public hearing is mandatory to taking the decision to start any developmental activity project. The consultation needed with the proposed developmental activity, the bona fide local residents means surrounding residents involved in the public hearing, local associations, if is there any NGOs or societies can involve in public hearing. They can express their opinion related to the project activity, and environmental groups active in the area. The environmental NGOs, unions also include in public hearing, and any other person located at the project site and sites of displacements. Displacement of people by the project activity, they can also involve in public hearing. They can convey their opinion on the project, positive, negative impacts. Next, decision making. The consultation between the project proponent. Project proponent means owner of the project, and also they can assist by the consultants, environmental consultants, and the impact assessment authority. The authority assisted by the central government and state government. The decision on environmental clearance is arrived by different steps, including evaluation of environmental impact and effective environmental management plan. These two steps are very important in giving environmental clearance after decision making. Monitoring the clearance conditions. The monitoring of the project impacts both construction and operational phase. Before starting and after operational phase, need to monitoring the clearance conditions which we have provided in the environmental impact assessment report. And this ensure that commitments made are complied. Once complied with the requirements, standards, We need to follow the standards throughout the operation phase. Next, corrective actions should be taken if the impact exceeds the prediction level. In the EIA decision making process, we provide predicted levels of the environment that may be sometimes wrong, that should be correct in the operational phase. In the EIA process, the first step is the proposal identification and screening, whether it is feasible to the environmental impact assessment, it required or not. After the initial environmental examinations, if required, we, we need to apply for the EIA decision making. The components of the environmental impact assessment. Rapid EIA is for speedier appraisal process. It is easy to give the compliance clearance from the authorities. The appraisal process, authorities involved various levels. Next, depending on the nature, location, and scale of the project, EIA report should contain different components: air environment, noise environment, water environment, biological environment, and land environment, socio-economic health environment, risk assessments related to the project, and environmental management plan. How we minimize the adverse negative impacts, how we conserving the natural resources, how we preventing the pollution levels with the project, what are the technologies adopting for the project, required design for the project, and in the components of the EIA report, the biological environment. Majority of the projects started near the agricultural lands. So the level of the soil health and the groundwater quality of the project surrounding are most important to provide the baseline data. Air environment. Already we have discussed about this existing status of ambient air quality within the region up to 7 to 10 kilometers from the area, from the location. The monitoring the meteorological data, wind speed, wind direction, and humidity of the area, and ambient temperature and fluctuations, temperatures, all this considered as meteorological data. and emission status, quality of the air from the proposed site. All these are needed for the environmental management. The prediction changes in the ambient air quality through the air quality models. We can mitigate measures at source level. The proposed pollution control devices minimize the gaseous emissions that maintain the ambient air quality standards. Noise environment. Monitoring the present status of the noise levels before starting the project and operational phase within the impact zone of the impact zone of the project. Predicting the future noise levels based on the baseline data of noise pollution related to the proposed project, including traffic movement. By impacting the traffic, identification of impacts, any anticipated rise in noise levels on the surrounding environment will affect adverse effect on the human health and displacement of the animals, displacement of the natural habitat, and recommendations on mitigation measures for noise pollution and water environment. Study of the existing water resources that may be groundwater, if any available water bodies are there, we can provide the data of the surface water bodies, pollution levels, and prediction if the impact on water resources due to the pumping and use of water in project. Quantification and characteristics of the wastewater. The proposed activity releasing any toxic waste into the water resources with the proposed activity that should be quantified and characterize the wastewater. And evaluation of proposed pollution, prevention and wastewater treatment systems if required for the proposed project, we need to establish prediction of impacts of different discharge effluents receiving the water bodies, provide the appropriate models to minimize the effluent discharge, and assessing the feasibility of water recycling, reusing of water, and detailed plan is needed. Next, biological environment. Survey of flora and fauna, especially biodiversity study, very important in environmental impact assessment study because different flora and fauna clearly delineating the season and the duration. Assessment of the flora and fauna within the project of the impact zone, surrounding area, and assessment of potential damage to terrestrial and aquatic flora by discharging the effluents and gases emissions from the proposed project activity. This can adversely impact the biodiversity, flora and fauna, and assessment damage to the terrestrial flora and fauna due to the air pollutions and land use and landscape changes. The changes of the air quality and land use pattern, the shrinkage of the forests adversely impact the terrestrial flora and fauna. And assessment damage to aquatic and marine flora and fauna, prediction of biological stresses within the proposed project, and land environment, study of the soil characteristics, type of soil, and existing land use pattern and topography of the land, drainage pattern within the proposed project, elimination of the estimation of the project impacts, how the project impacting the land use, the surrounding landscape, topography of the area, drainage pattern, and groundwater hydrology. Next, identification of potential utility of treated effluent in land application. Previously applied any fertilizers if the project area was an agriculture area, and estimation and characterization of solid waste. Minimizing of waste, environmentally compatible disposal, and socio-economic health environment. Collection of demographic and related socio-economic data and economic benefits arising from the project, employment to the surrounding people, and it requires rehabilitation requirements for the specially displacement of the people who reside in the project area, and delineation of measures of minimize the adverse effects. All these are related to the socio-economic and health environment. Another important tool used in the environmental impact assessment, geographic information system. Analyze the impacts by using this tool. Risk assessment techniques assess the livelihood and consequences of environmental effects. It is help to monitor the environmental impacts, the land use pattern, and environmental management plan. The mitigation measures, including prevention and control of environmental pollutants, environmental components, and rehabilitation resettlement plan for the nearby residents, and delineation of monitoring scheme for compliance of conditions. Next, the benefits of the environmental assessment. Reduce the cost and time of the project implementation, cost saving,